already introduced you as the key man who jumped in for Diane Hinchcliffe, who had to leave us for family reasons.
Yeah, I had a strange weekend. On Saturday evening, I was having dinner with my daughter, watching NCIS on TV, and then 5 minutes later, I was packing to come here.
Yeah, so that's, and you all have to know that he had to do something for his wife in the garden on Sunday, so he was pleased that I called him on Saturday evening.
It's true.
So, yeah, we talked already on this stage about social being an enabler for digital transformation.
Mm-hmm.
You are very much riding this wave of the digital transformation, or talking about the digital wave in subject about that the digital wave is coming over the enterprises, and if they don't take care about it, then they get lost.
They get swamped.
So you will enlighten us with your talk. 20
to.
minutes. It's your stage.
Excellent. Thank you.
That's yours.
And this is the clicker, yeah? Okay. So, guten Tag. Now I've run out of my German. I was really interested that there were these little English phrases that came out, like the dark side of social, amongst all the German that I didn't understand, so it's good fun. But yes, so I'm David Terra. I'm the founder and CXO of a digital transformation consultancy called Agile Elephant. I haven't got time to explain why it's called Agile Elephant, but I think that's a cool name. I happen to be DT on Twitter. That's not my initials. It actually stands for digital transformation. No, it doesn't, but never mind. So what I'm going to try and do is kind of, and I might do this in a kind of an East Coast accent, since I'm trying to impersonate Diane Hinchcliffe. It's a real shame that he can't be here, and hopefully he and his partner and the kids are going to be fine. That's why it's me, not him. I'm going to try and do three things. The first thing I'm going to try and do is make sense of this digitally disruptive business landscape that we are in at the moment, and within that highlight how social is absolutely an enabler for how you can transform your business and why you need to. The second thing I'm going to do is come up with 8 building blocks that you can consider to help do that transformation. And most importantly, there's one key message that's going to pop up throughout the presentation. So, I want to start with a very interesting quote from Alvin Toffler, who wrote Future Shock. The illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. And that's one of the most important messages, and that underpins my key message. By the way, I tend to get excited and talk very fast, and I use a lot of slides, but hopefully that will be fun and maybe a bit different from some of the other presenters, but hopefully you can keep up with me and follow. That's the agenda that I'm going to go through. So I'm going to talk a bit about this new business landscape. The way I describe it is as a wave, and you'll see that. And then I've got a few book recommendations for you, three interesting books. And then I don't like the various definitions of digital transformation, so I've come up with our explanation of what digital transformation is, and you can throw rocks at me or whatever, but I'd be interested in your comments. And then lastly, I'll go through those 8 building blocks to help you transform. So, this digital landscape, hang on, can you explain it all to me? Well, we've actually been talking digital for 20 years. It was actually in 1995 when Nicholas Negroponte collected together a bunch of articles that blog posts he'd put on Wired and came out with the book Being Digital. So we've been talking digital for 20 years, and his idea was that we were going to move bits and not atoms. And then over that 20 years, if you take the 20 years as a kind of a time frame, there's an awful lot of social media, social networking, portable fabric that has happened in that 20-year time frame. Obviously, wikis came along in '95, and then we started to use the term blogging towards the end of the '90s. Wikipedia starts on 2001, WordPress goes through there. So the interesting thing there is there's a lot of stuff that is now used day to day in our personal lives and used day to day in business that's only really happened in the last decade, in the last 10 years. It's fascinating. Then In 2012, Mark Andreessen wrote that blog post about software eating the world, and there's more and more technology that's actually taking over. This is one of Dion's slides, which actually highlights the elements of the digital business landscape that we're in at the moment. And you'll see that collaboration platforms are the heart of it, but there's actually a lot of legacy stuff and a lot of complexity associated with where we're at. One thing I do know, though, and I don't care what business you're in, your business model is under threat. Some smarter, nimbler competitor is about to come around the corner and take away your business. Someone like an Airbnb or an Uber, or maybe something less esoteric than those, is going to use technology and social in a different way to the way you are and take away your business. Everybody's business is under threat. So there's an English phrase, necessity is the mother of invention. I want to kind of subvert that and change it into reinvention is the mother of necessity. So this, we call it, we think about this as a kind of a wave. And basically, you've either got to ride it or you're going to go under. But how does this wave get to be created? Well, actually, there's a whole load of infrastructure things to do with outsourcing and low cost. Now, you know this stuff. I'm just presenting it in a different way to kind of highlight the complexity of where we're at the moment. But there's things to do with connectivity, the Wi-Fi, 3G, human factors, which actually mean if I want to start a business, maybe 10 years ago or 20 years ago, I had to mortgage my house to get together the money. Maybe 10 years ago that it was cheaper, but today, if 2 or 3 of us had an idea, we can actually start a company this afternoon, get some resource on a credit card, start a website. Within days, we could be up and running and off. So the barrier to entry for starting a new business has never been lower. It's a fascinating world that we live in. And that's what underpins books like Friedman's The World is Flat, where globalization has changed everything, or Chris Anderson's The Long Tail, where using this technology, suddenly I can get to niche markets and make money out of niche markets in ways that I never could before. Or Clay Shirky's Here Comes Everybody, where I can actually crowdsource crowdsource expertise and do things in a different way and use social in that way. And that kind of forms the basis, the bottom of the wave. The next part of the wave is what I call the big shift. I'm a technology guy, been in the business for too many decades. Every 5 or 8 years, we have a technology disruption which changes everything. So we went from mainframes to mini computers. I was in IBM in 81 when the IBM PC was announced. Then we grouped them together. We had networks. Then we got into the era of client server. Every 5 or 8 years, we get a technology disruption like that, which changes everything. At the moment, we have 3 happening simultaneously. We've got the shift to cloud and web apps happening at the same time as everything going social, happening at the same time as we're all walking around with the internet in our hands. We've got little devices like this, which actually we can access the internet from. We've never had 3 disruptions happen before. All bets are off, the world's different. And just like one of those kind of cheesy infomercials that you get on TV, but yet there's more. On top of that, we've got things like 3D printing and artificial intelligence. And each one of those things is just as significant. I've grown up with Star Trek. I've got the communicator. I've got the little kind of iPad thing that the captain used to be handed all the time. I'm now going to have the replicator in the corner of the room. That's going to change everything. Or the Internet of Things. I mean, all that connectivity, all those devices, Gartner predicts there are going to be 25 billion devices connected in just 5 years. That's 3 devices for every person on the planet. That is amazing. And it also means there's an awful lot of horsepower and data going to be collected underneath those things. Huge changes happening in the next 5 years. I'm at a loss as to how to predict them. So that goes into the top of the wave. And basically, kind of like current thinking, business as usual thinking with all that stuff and silo communities, business as usual, that is going to get swamped by the wave. And what you actually need is different digital thinking. And actually, my 8 building blocks is a kind of an expansion of that digital thinking. So we'll come on to that. But one other important thing is that you have to think about this holistically. Those organizations that just put some sort of social business platform in and don't connect it properly to the business, we have an expression in England called lipstick on a pig. You may just be using some sort of enterprise social network to kind of replace your email system and sit across the top of the organization. And maybe it will do some things, but it won't do enough. Actually, your strategy has to be linked to the heart of the way you create value, to the business process itself. And we have some complications as to how we do that. So in thinking about it, you need a framework which looks at the whole. We happen to use the McKinsey 7S model. It works. It covers all of the hard and soft elements of business. It covers things like employee engagement. They're important. Actually, I don't care which framework you use, as long as you think about this thing end to end and you think about it holistically. So that's my digital enterprise wave. That's the way I think about this. But actually, there's lots of ways we talk about it. This shift to digital, what the hell are we calling it today? So basically, I call it the wave. IDC calls it the third platform. Gartner calls it the nexus of forces. We're all talking about the same thing in slightly different language. And actually, the language is also interesting in that I've grown through a world where we were talking about Enterprise 2.0 stuff, and then we talked about social business. Alan Patrick and Janet Parkinson and myself started our consultancy, Agile Elephant, in January 2014. We started it as a social business consultancy. Within 6 months, we changed all the messaging on our website to say digital transformation. And lots of people did the same during 2014. It's the year of digital transformation. You probably do need some sort of social collaboration platform at the heart, but it's all about much more than just technology. This is another of Dion's slides that I've used in his honor, since he can't be on stage today. This is an interesting one, actually talking about the whole digital enterprise and the role of the CIO. And I wanted to put it up because I want to highlight the fact that we all live with legacy systems and core IT, and then there are what he calls edge IT, and this kind of element of shadow IT that's happening where business units or the CMO are going off and doing things without the CIO involved at all. That's the kind of world we live in now, because it's very easy to procure new systems just on a credit card and get off and running and get them away. And those people in those departments are actually thinking, why the hell can't my CIO and his IT department do stuff as nimbly and quickly as that? And the modern CIO has to recognize he or she has to change. Now, the greatest danger in times of turbulence is not the turbulence, it is to act with yesterday's logic. Great quote from Peter Drucker, which is another thing that comes back to the core message. Here's a few book recommendations. There's a great book by a guy called Jaron Lanier called Who Owns the Future? I tried to find one sentence in the book that kind of sums up the whole book. And here's the sentence that I found. At the height of its power, photography company Kodak employed more than 140,000 people and was worth $28 billion. They even invented the first digital camera, but today Kodak is bankrupt, and the new face of digital photography has become Instagram. When Instagram was sold to Facebook for $1 billion, it employed only 13 people. Where did those jobs disappear to? What happened to the wealth that all those middle-class jobs created? That's the kind of world we live in today. The other thing that Lanier talks about is what he calls siren servers. We're used to getting stuff for free, but the price of getting stuff for free is that suddenly we become the product. Our data and the stuff that we are doing becomes the product. It's part of the world that we live in. Here's another interesting book called The Management Shift. Vlatko Hlupic, one of our friends, she's actually going to be speaking at our London edition of Congress Media's Enterprise 2.0 Summit. So the Enterprise 2.0 Summit London, which we co-produce with Congress Media, is on October the 22nd. I'd love to see you in London, little advert. But Vlatko's on there, and she's actually analysed 20 organisations of all different sizes and come up with a kind of an analysis of the management style. And from traditional to emergent, and emergent, the smart companies need an unlimited mindset, an unbound culture. So basically there's a type of leadership that's required. Read that book, it's very good. Last one I'm going to recommend is called Leading Digital, by Andrew McAfee and George Westerman and the like. There have been dozens and dozens of books on digital that have been published in the last year. This, I believe, is one of the best ones. And one of the reasons for that is that it actually analyzes the landscape in terms of capability and leadership. And one of the things I really like is that they categorized all the organizations that they looked at. There's about 800 organizations that they surveyed, put them into 4 categories. The more digitally savvy organizations in the top category had made 9% more revenue, 26% more profit, and were worth 12% more on the stock market. So doing digital well adds to your bottom line enormously. ROI on this stuff is easy, it's what you get. Now, next I've got my definition of digital transformation. The reason that I put this together is that too many of the current definitions don't tell the whole story. So, my definition is, digital transformation is the process of shifting your organization from a legacy approach to new ways of working and thinking, using digital, social, mobile, and emerging technologies. It involves the change in leadership, different thinking, the encouragement of innovation and new business models, incorporating the digitization of assets and increased use of technology to improve the experience of your organization's employees, customers, suppliers, partners, and stakeholders. And it's my belief that if you go to Gartner or you go to Altimeter Group or you go to some of the other definitions, they don't actually tell you the whole story. Maybe they focus too much on customers, and actually there's lots of stuff you need to be doing internally as well. So, what are these building blocks I was talking about, the 8 building blocks? Well, the first one of the 8 is culture. Peter Drucker famously and probably apocryphally probably didn't say culture eats strategy for lunch, but it's widely reported that he did. Actually, it's not an either or. Both are very important. But one of the key things that we find when we go and talk to organizations is that actually working with the culture is one of the key things you have to work with. Either they've got a great doesn't actually fit this shift to digital, and then I have to kind of slowly shift the culture in the right direction. But working with the culture is vital. Another thing that has anyone read Simon Sinek's Start With Why book, or seen the Simon Sinek Start With Why TED Talk? If you have, go find the TED Talk, go read the book. So many organizations have actually lost why they're doing what they're doing. They focus on the how and the what and forget why they're doing it. Very important. Leadership. You've got to have a really strong leadership, and actually is spot on in terms of the emergent leadership that works better in this new environment. It's all about a different mindset. It's all about teamwork. It's all about vision. It's about purpose. It's about openness. It's about sharing. There are a whole set of characteristics that you can find in the digitally savvy organizations that are all about sharing knowledge and sharing responsibility that work better in this time of digital transformation. The next thing is there is no one-size-fits-all solution. Every company is different. There is not one, I mean, IBM or Microsoft would love me to say that there's some, theirs is the best social business platform, but there is no panacea. There are lots of options out there. There are lightweight solutions like Slack. There's things like all sorts of different solutions. They're all good at some things and not so good at others. We're actually at an early stage in the development of social business platforms. So, different strokes for different folks. The next thing is that you have to think about this in terms of an end-to-end solution. I used my lipstick on a pig phrase earlier. You have to actually tackle this across the whole of the business and actually properly link what you're doing into what creates value for your company. The business platforms that actually link social collaboration to where the work is done, to actually the real business processes of the organization, those are the ones that are more effective. So you have to think about this in an end-to-end way. The next thing, and I've stolen a great Hugh MacLeod cartoon for continuous reinvention. Back in the 90s, we were all, well, those of us that were around, were all talking about quality circles and improving execution and continuous improvement and that kind of thing. We're now living in a world where getting the execution better isn't enough. That's business as usual thinking. We have to be thinking in terms of continuous reinvention. It's back to that thing about the smarter, nimbler competitor coming around the corner with a new idea. That is vital. The next thing to say is your organizations have to get creative. And this is a big thing for me. We don't teach enough thinking skills in our schools, in all of the countries I've been to. We don't have enough emphasis on creativity. Our organizations don't think of this in terms. If I live in a world where information is free, if I live in a world where I can use Google's Mechanical Turk, or I can outsource stuff to India, going for low-cost commodity stuff is not going to cut it. The thing that's going to make my business go forward is new ideas, new things that I could do. So what I encourage organizations to do is to actually think in terms of making innovation, thinking, experimenting, all those things a natural part of the workflow. Add that into what you do. Next thing to say is that there's got to be balance inside and out. There's an awful lot of emphasis within the social world in terms of social media marketing and monitoring and that kind of thing. You have to actually look at this in terms of what it can do to improve the experience of your employees and suppliers and stakeholders and everyone. And lastly, I mentioned design thinking on that chart, and actually the idea of actually changing the way your organization works to design thinking so that you're actually thinking about the whole process of the way you add value and create new products is part of the mindset that's essential for actually making your organization ready for digital transformation. So you put all those together, those are the 8 building blocks, but by far the most important one is the one I put in the middle, all about continuous reinvention, because at the end of the day, it's new ideas and new products and actually changing your business model and thinking about this in terms of actually, wherever I'm at, I can't stand still. I have to actually compete with myself and think of a better idea, because if I don't, somebody else will. Whoops. In this slide set, which will be on SlideShare, I've got references to the various things, and that's me, and thank you very much.
Okay, I'm here together with David Terra at the social business arena at CeBIT. You were keynoting this morning, talking about social as an enabler for the digital transformation. So what is your take on this statement?
Okay, well I guess I think it's clear that social is part of the glue that connects all the business together, or it can be if used effectively. And we're living in a world where over the last 20 years, the whole kind of digital framework that we're used to in our day-to-day lives and in business has kind of grown up and steadily increased, and more of the infrastructure has happened, maybe even over just the last 10 years. And for an effective business, you have to actually adopt those kind of technologies and bring them into the way you create value and into the core of your business process.
So therefore, the digital is the new black, the digital transformation?
There is the possibility that the digital transformation term is kind of like a catch-all. It's a bit like cloud was in the technology space a short while ago, where almost everything can now be thought of as part of digital. So it's important to recognise what it is and define it. And actually, the language that we use in this space has been evolving. We've been talking Enterprise 2.0 and then social business. And our Agile Elephant consultancy, when we started in January, we started as a social business consultancy, but within 6 months, we changed all of our messaging to digital transformation, because that's really what we were talking about. And it really, part of us, I mean, we talk about this digital wave. The important thing is to actually jump on the surfboard and surf that wave and make use of it rather than get swamped by it. So our language has to change, but we're talking about a really important thing that every business needs to understand.
Who's in charge for this driving this digital transformation?
Well, I think there isn't one answer. Every one of the things we talk about is that there are no one-size-fits-all solutions. But the other important thing is that, okay, the CIO and the traditional IT organisation may not be fast enough and nimble enough to deploy these new things. So often the CMO has started to deploy these kind of solutions, and maybe we need employee engagement, so maybe there's a chief human resources officer who also needs to get involved. I don't think there's any one answer. It depends on which organisation you're in. Some organisations are actually setting up a new chief digital officer to look after this. In truth, every single executive in the C-suite needs to be involved. It needs to be an end-to-end thing. The CIO and the CMO are obviously heavily involved. The person who's in charge of human resources needs to be heavily involved, but it's going to be different companies as to who's in the lead.
What is your key recommendation on how to start this journey?
I think that the first thing is to get educated, to actually understand what organisations are doing and where this is adding value. And it depends on the leadership. To actually make this effective in your organisation, you need to get the leaders on board, you need to get the C-suite on board. So depending on where they're at, you'll need to take a different approach. Maybe you need to educate them, so you need to get evidence either from a pilot you're running or from outside organisations that have done this and can show how it actually adds value to the bottom line, makes that company more profitable, generates more revenue. Real things that the C-suite can actually understand, the real return on investment that digital transformation can provide, rather than talking about some of the qualitative things. Let's bring it down to numbers.
Great. Thank you for the interview.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Space is actually transformation. I think it is one of the most hyped, overused words when organizations start to look at what does truly disruptive technology do and what's the promise of truly disruptive technologies. And if you think about some of the innovations we've seen in the last couple of years, like social business, like cloud, like mobile, we've rushed to use the word disruption over transformation. We've rushed to say, oh, this is going to be disruptive in and of itself. Social business was not disruptive. Cloud, other than disruptive to vendors, was not just disruptive on its own. Mobile, as a technology, was not disruptive in and of itself. But unfortunately, I think we have reached a point, and I hate to admit it, where we are truly starting to see the early forms of disruptive business models, where traditional business models are being turned upside down and new business models are coming to play. And I think one of the best definitions that I actually agree with when you start to think about true disruption is what Clay Christensen put in place, and it reads, disruptive innovations transforms complicated, costly products and services that were previously available only to a few people, and turning them into simpler, cheaper products available to many people. And if you start to look at what's behind disruption, there's one common theme that I found across multiple examples that I'm going to share with you right now that suggests that disruption truly happens at the last mile. And what do I mean by the last mile? And we're going to look at 4 or 5 examples to try to explain that to you. Some of them familiar to you, and hopefully some of them are new that we can discuss together. The first one is the business of networking. In 2009 or 2010, Cisco decided to get into, they looked at the success that they had as a networking company that built switches and routers that all of us use in our businesses today. And what Cisco found was, hey, we provide the hardware and software that connects people. Why don't we get into the business of connecting people itself? And they came out with a product called Cisco Quad. And Cisco Quad was supposed to be like Facebook inside the enterprise, and they said, we're going to move up the stack and start to get into the business of connecting people, not just building the technology at the back end that connects people. Well, it didn't work. Now what you find is Facebook said, wait a second, we have 1 billion people, which sounds like a lot to all of us, but there's another 6 billion that they don't have. And when they start to look at why they don't have those 6 billion people, not all reasons, but one big reason is the networking technology underneath it that connects people is expensive, is hard to get, is inconsistent, and billions of people are left off this thing called called social networking on the enterprise. And so Cisco has now decided to go downstream and open source the best networking technology and threaten a traditional networking model where they will provide free networking technology to the masses so that the other 6 billion people who are not online can start to get online. What happened there? Facebook, who owns the last mile, which is they actually have the people, were much more effective and powerful to be able to change the entire supply chain of technologies that connects all of us together. One of the hottest examples that are in market right now, if you look at the whole payments business, again, you look at the traditional vendors who have been in payments. The telecommunications vendors who power phones decided that they wanted to get into the payments business, and they started to put payment technology inside SIM cards. That didn't work because they didn't control the phone. Then you had companies like PayPal that provide digital payments online who started to build apps and said, use our app on a mobile phone. That was too kludgy because I had to leave a commerce site, go to some other app, try and find information to be able to make a purchase. What does Apple do? Apple embeds payments right into the operating system of its latest phone. Why? Because Apple owns the last mile. They own the very device that many of us here have in our pockets right now. They could rearrange the entire supply chain of how payments work by deciding where payments will sit on your phone inside the operating system. Today, they let you put your Visa or American Express or MasterCard into there, but who's to say that Apple decides that they don't really need anyone because they're controlling the actual transaction? Apple has more money in its bank right now than the US Treasury. Apple could become that bank that takes entire industries out of play. Why? Because they own the device that's in your pocket, your pocket, your pocket, mine. I know some of us have Samsungs here too, but you get my point. What is that? That's the last mile. The last mile that owns the actual device controls the entire supply chain that heads behind it. You know, people look at Tesla as a car, which it is, of course, but if you work with me for a second, Tesla is also the last mile in a gigantic delivery of hardware and software and applications and an assembly line. If you think of all the hardware and software that goes into it, that manifests itself in a car. I just read an article yesterday. Tesla has decided that they've had some breakthrough in their technology where they can extend the range of the battery by about 50 hours. How they're going to put that into every car? They're going to send a software update overnight, and every car is going to have 50 more miles before they need to update the battery. That's how powerful software design models are becoming. Now, who's to say that Tesla cannot also start to decide now which Maps application shows up in your car, or which restaurant shows up that is within a 5-mile radius when you suggest a restaurant? The power that the last mile has on deciding what goes into that final mile experience, again, is being retested inside an age-old industry like manufacturing, which changes not just the components and the parts that go into it, but every single software piece that you and I use that drives our experience. That is tremendously powerful. Netflix is one of my favorite examples. Came out to be just a movie studio, went out to be a rental facility for movie studios. Sounded like a great idea to the movie studios. Why? Because people weren't buying DVDs, and this was another digital channel to distribute movies. Netflix gets to hundreds of millions of end users. What does it decide to do? Write its own content. Last year, Netflix won 7 Emmy Awards for its own movies. In effect, kicking the movie studios to the curb and saying, I built my whole business on your back. Now it's time for you to move because the user is on my platform. And they will now decide what movies you and I start to see. And again, 7 Emmy-winning movies are not bad movies, clearly. I mean, TV shows, sorry. They're not bad TV shows. Think about how powerful that is because they own the relationship with you and me more so than Disney, who owns the artists and the movies, right? The last mile, again, will decide and rearrange the entire supply and value chains that come beyond it. Retail, one of my favorite examples, this is a small company in Silicon Valley called Poshmark. How many of you have stuff in your closets, expensive things that you bought, a bag, a purse, they happen to be only women's clothing here, that you'd like, that you're not kind of using, but you don't know what to do with, and you paid a ton of money for it? Anybody have anything in their closets? I do. There's an $18 billion used marketplace that exists right now, $18 billion. There's $700 billion worth of commerce, though, done retail in the US. And what Poshmark is doing is saying, if we could digitally create a marketplace where you could find a place to get rid of those things that you have that are really expensive because you don't want to use them, for 20% of the cost, which is what they take as a convenience fee, you gave birth to an entire new model that starts to compete with new retail. You've now freed up cash that you have because you can sell this, and you can start to create an entirely new buying cycle that didn't exist till today. Poshmark is doing that to compete with brand new products, right? They did $100 million in revenue in 4 years from zero, right? I'm a big food guy, I cook a lot. This is one of my favorite examples. Munchery is a business where what they're doing right now, again, is they are looking at how restaurants have artificially controlled the number of good chefs out there and the number of people who would love to eat out but can't afford to eat out. And so what Munchery does is they have found a way to take typical restaurant costs and cut it into half by going to 10x, 100x of the chefs who don't get into good restaurants, who would love to cook for you and send food to your house for half the cost of what you'd pay at a restaurant. They created supply side, all these chefs who can't get into good restaurants, and they created massive demand from people like you and me who would love to eat out more often, but it's just not economically feasible to eat out more often. Now you can get incredible chefs sending food right to your house, disintermediating that whole block in the middle, which is the limited amount of restaurants who are sitting in one place. This is an entirely new way of coming up with disruptive models that are starting to look at new waves of businesses that are going after very traditional businesses in there. And so what does this do in my mind? This essentially, if you look at Uber, what is Uber doing? Uber is fundamentally finding ways to find more drivers who would love to service more passengers, but there was this taxi business in the middle that was limiting this demand and supply artificially. What is Munchery doing? Taking 10x the amount of chefs on one side, 10x the amount of customers on the other side, and finding new ways to be able to go in there. That is disruptive. That is creating brand new models out of nowhere. That is not incremental. And so we spent some time looking at what are some of the criteria behind these things, and there are 3 things that really jump out at me. that define all these businesses that we looked at, and which is where I believe enterprises can start to really understand how this works. First is untapped utility. There were those 10,000 chefs that couldn't get jobs, who now have found millions of customers who would love to get a chef home meal show up at their house for about $9 a head, right? Untapped utility. Untapped utility that digital models now find a place for it to be able to come out and actually play out. Every single one of these is data-driven. The idea, I mean, can you imagine Uber using traditional CRM technology? No. Every single time you order a car, the amount of data it starts to know about you and me, our preferences, what kind of cars we like, where we go. I only use Uber when I go to the airport. It knows this about me. It knows that my travel is time sensitive. There's all this data starts to build profile information about us, not by someone manually entering things, but by just monitoring the work that we do in terms of how we're working. So fundamentally here, you've got a data-driven business model is the underpinning of the entire new digital economy. And then finally, it's digital customers, partners, and employees, right? The idea that Uber lets not only customers rate the drivers, but lets drivers rate the customers is a phenomenal advancement if you start to think about creating massive amounts of transparency inside these new ecosystems. There is no information arbitrage. Nobody controls anything. The information is out there, whether you're a good passenger or you're a good driver. All that information is available out there. The underpinnings of these new digital models exposes a lot of this data so you can start to drive behavior and drive relationships in new ways, right? And so you have to now look at what is the implications on the platforms you use as organizations, the applications you use, and networks that you might want to participate in, right? And so there are three things that I just want to leave you with to start to think about how would you dissect these as enterprises. The first big thing is this concept of talent management. When you look at these new organizations, they obviously have the core things that every company has, but this is not enough for you to be able to drive how you run your business. What you need to start to think about is the analytics behind the behaviors. Are you in a model where you are capturing every piece of data about behaviors? It could be anonymous. It doesn't have to be about the individual in particular. But do you have fast trending data to be able to make data-driven decisions really, really quickly? The second is learning. You can have a unidirectional learning system, right, where you're sending information to people, but in these network-based business models that you just saw, the information is about how you're driving peer-to-peer sharing, how you're taking the best drivers, taking the information that they have, sharing it with the new drivers, how you're driving velocity in your data to be able to keep up with these new digital models. You cannot only rely on core, you need the core. The question becomes, how are you driving these information networks? Performance acceleration, another big topic. It is not based on doing the old school performance reviews. You are looking at behaviors, you're looking at actions, you're seeing how vibrant your employee networks are inside the company, and you can start to really be able to monitor who's doing what, who are the experts at what I need, how do I start to leverage talent inside organizations. The second is in the area of customer engagement. We have spent the last 40 years, I work for SAP, we are one of the companies that puts these technologies into place. You've got your customer records in place, you've got marketing plans, you've got service tickets for your call centers. This is baseline technologies. This is not what is going to drive the digital world on its own. You need these are core. But what these organizations that you just saw, and we've studied them, are looking at is things like this. It is behavioral analytics. What do they know about the end customer or prospect before they even called you? By the time they call you, they're not a prospect anymore. How do you grab information about these users well in advance and drive velocity around it? That is the new customer engagement model that you need to look at. Expert networks, how much latency exists in your organization? Do you really know who the experts are to be able to rally around these customers? Every single one of those business models is based on customer success and be able to drive customer success. You can't do that unless you have the best experts in your organization, knowing the worst problems in your organization and trying to solve them. This is how these companies work, right? And then peer reviews again. We talked about Uber. That is the fundamental model where everybody on both sides is rated in the open. Do you have these high velocity models inside your organization? And then finally on the supplier side, it's the same thing. We've taken care of the foundational transactional stuff, but are you driving core innovation through these partners? When you look at what Tesla does, for example, the data about the car and about how you drive and what applications you use passes all the way through to the supply chain. Everybody in the supply chain gets to see that. so you can start to drive improvement in how your business works. Do you have that kind of low latency inside your organizations to be able to compete with these new models? So this is some of the fundamental thinking that organizations who are, if you're an incumbent organization and you're looking at either the threats that these new business models bring, or you want to transform your own business to drive it, these are the levers that you're going to need to pull around talent management, around customer engagement, and rethinking the power that you bring through your supply chain. These are the table stakes of every single example that I provided. This is what they have sorted out already. So to the degree that you understand how these matter to your business, the faster you do that, the faster you're in a position to be able to use the right platform technologies that you have, the right business applications that sit around that, and then understanding what are the networks I need to own or participate in. That is fundamentally what it is. This is how you will eventually drive and unlock disruption in your enterprises. I work for SAP. This is how we think about these technologies. We've got 17 million users on our collaboration platforms to drive customer engagement and employee engagement. We've got 1 million suppliers, and we've got some of these cloud applications that are data-centric that allow us to be able to bring the underpinnings of data-driven business models to bear for our customers. Thank you very much.
Great.
Good timing?
Yes, perfect timing. So let's take a seat. We still have some time for Q&A. So essentially, if we bring it down, it's we have to think from the customer, then we can do the disruption.
Yeah, I think you have to paint a picture of the experience a customer wants, and then you back that into the kinds of technologies, platforms, and networks you participate in.
That's easy for those product marketing people who are thinking in solutions for the customers, but how about the business process people who are just thinking about the process within the company, how to serve internal needs at that point?
Well, I think, so I think there's two pieces to that, right? First is your core technology is not going away. You need to close the books. You need your accounting systems. You need all the systems, right? This is the transformative layer that sits on top of it. That's how we look at it, right? And so when we look at it, we look at sort of the combination of people, data, process, and content, and you start to understand what are those white spaces that need to be filled to be able to serve these customers better, right? It's not about throwing out what you have. It's layering social collaboration technologies, for example, customer engagement platforms on top of these transactional systems so that you can drive the right decision making based on the data that comes out of it. That's the difference.
But still, thinking in the last mile means at that point I have to think about customers. So it's the external customer at that point, or do I have to think about the internal customers?
No, I think it starts with the external customer. Absolutely, right? And then you think about what are the internal ramifications. Am I in a world where my customers are moving at such high velocity amongst them? Yeah. And then the minute they hit my doorstep, I have a 25-year-old infrastructure that doesn't allow me to respond fast enough. These competitors I brought up don't have the baggage. Yes. Right? It's greenfield. And so we can complain about it or we can do something about it. And the question becomes, how do you start to decouple the transaction layer with the engagement layer? So this can move at the pace that it needs to move. Today that's the problem. It's being limited by the transaction layer, right?
So, but how do we bring this together also in the minds of the people? So this is technologically, there are nearly no problems, so we can integrate the one system with the other, but at the end we have to change the company.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a great question, and I think this is a question we've dealt with forever, right? Whether it comes to social technologies, collaboration technologies, honestly, you can't start inside out. You can't start with, promising a better world. You start with a collective understanding on the snapshot of what is your customer's persona going to look like now and over the next 10 years. Once you agree on that, then you have the license to start to say, what are the changes we need to make to respond to that customer, because if we don't, somebody else will. That is the only common language that works to be able to fight culture, old ways of working.
So with the idea of really taking the customer into account of our thinking or pondering about this collaboration thing, we are also closer to the business, is that right?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's a recalibration, right? of who the customer is. If you look at the restaurant business, for example, there may be a certain way that you've been looking at potential customers, visitors, and then someone like Manchuri comes around and says, I'm actually going to send the chef to your house. You didn't even think about that. That's the kind of thinking where you start to say, over the next 10 years, this is what I'm going to be competing with. Not just the restaurant down the street, but good food showing up at your house.
But still, I'm always coming back at this point, because also in our discussions this morning, we always drifted towards a very strategic, high-level discussion at that point. That we really always have to take into account the whole transformational vision behind it, etc. And what you're saying is also we have to take into account the customer and think from there. Who should be in charge for that? So, because there are a lot of people out there who are on the project level in charge for making collaboration successful. I doubt that they can really take into account the customer at that point.
I think it's a great question, and I think this is exactly where we fall into trouble, right? Because it looks so daunting, because everyone needs to stop what they're doing, and that's not going to happen. Where we've seen the most success with this is when at least two constituencies come together. One is people on the front lines who probably have a better snapshot of the customer. The second is the core competency of your business and your organization. If you are, I don't know, if you're in manufacturing, or if you're in retail and you're like an Amazon, what is Amazon's core competency? It's not retail, it's actually the supply chain. So if the supply chain, which is the core of your business that differentiates you every day, and a snapshot of the customer, if those two teams first come together, that is the nucleus of your organization that will start to drive stuff. Bringing everybody to the seat in the beginning, I don't believe will get you far. You have to start with the core competency and understanding where the customer is and get everybody on board. Those are the only two ways it starts. If your core competency is selling and retail, then you start there.
Yeah.
Right? That we have seen success time and time again, and I have customer examples of that's exactly when it works.
But still, I still would like to emphasize at that point that only the top management can really take this direction, isn't it?
I believe that this is a non-starter if the top management is not behind it. Yes, I do not believe, unlike a lot of the social business thinking, it could be ground up, bottoms up. This is not. If there is no belief by the top management that the customer's dynamics and expectations are changing, then this doesn't go anywhere.
But there might be still some people in charge for this collaboration thing. So they have to wait until the top management has a paradigm shift in their mindset? Or can they somehow drive the change of the mindset?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen both, right? They can drive it by showing small examples, but no, I don't believe that you can drive it if there is no collective belief that our industry is under transformative threat, right? If there isn't one, then the collaboration changes are piecemeal, and that's not strategic, right? So I don't know, I've always been the type, like I'm not, to me, like the bottoms up thing, needs a balance with a belief from the top down that this can actually move the business forward.
So essentially, you're saying that the digital transformation as well, especially the disruptive digital transformation, can only succeed if there's a threat from outside?
Well, either there's a threat from outside, or you see the market dynamic shifting before your competitors do.
Okay.
Right? Either one.
Okay. So what are your recommendations on how to proceed with? I can make some analysis of my customer needs, and therefore find an idea on how to change my product and then disrupt my process.
Well, I think it's
approach to this.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing is really understanding. Look, any kind of data arbitrage has gone away. Right, data arbitrage is done. Your customer knows as much or more about you, your business, and your best competitor, right? So living in that reality, right, you have to be ready to provide data-driven solutions to this customer. So the question starts with, can I adapt in the flow to this customer's needs, or is it a batch process?
Okay.
And you can't fix something till you don't have the data. You need the data to be able to really understand what the problem is, right? And so to me, this is fundamentally getting your data under control first. and really getting a snapshot on the customer to be able to then realize what is the right modicum for engagement with this customer? How do they want to engage? Do they want to engage with me? Do they want to engage in a marketplace setting where I get out of the way and I bring the best suppliers and the best customers? What is that model in which this is going to work? That has to be established first, right? So I do think, though, that you can't just throw social collaboration technologies at this problem and hope that all this goes away, right? If you don't have the right data, you will not know what mechanisms to influence. So I think you start there, and this is where most companies, frankly, are still struggling. They have not got their data under control. And they are most likely losing to these upstarts, not because of the engagement, just the speed of data and knowledge that they have. By the second they can tell, trends changing. Right?
Okay, so if we try to draw a blueprint for a good strategy.
Yeah.
So there's not
let's try one without a problem, right?
Yeah, there's no one blueprint that fits to all.
Right.
We know about this, but still, what are the cornerstones of a good blueprint? So you say the data insights first about the customers, trends and developments.
Right. So I think I had those three buckets up there, right?
Yeah.
So I think to me it's three things. First is understanding the untapped utility in your space. Is there an untapped utility? Is the dynamics of the model such that someone is controlling the demand and supply, right? It's like what we saw with Uber. When you got an Uber in place, you suddenly realize that there should be a lot more taxis on the road, and there's a lot more people who would love to take cabs, but the model is just too expensive or it doesn't work. Is there untapped utility? Because if you don't go after it, somebody is going to go after it. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing is once you understand what that is, then understanding what is the data-driven model behind it that actually works. And then the third is what is the right engagement model required in your business? How do you want your customers to interact with each other, or buyers and suppliers? What is it, right? How much data do you want shared between them so that you get out of the way and it's an authentic business? Third is how do your employees need to be structured and collaborating to keep up with that customer, right? And then the fourth is we have created unnecessary artificial boundaries between suppliers, partners, customers, that whole world, right? And largely because technologies were built that way, sort of, here's my supply chain technology. Nobody else should ever touch it. And breaking those molds, because every one of these people have taken out all information hoarding out of that entire space, right?
Okay, so wrapping this up is really, well, driving the digital transformation is really a top management job.
It is, yeah, if the top management doesn't believe that there is a disruption to be had, then yeah, why are you doing it? Don't do it.
And it should start on the outside.
Absolutely.
And coming to the inside?
100%. 100%.
And based on data?
Based on data.
And then at some point we can accelerate the transformation process with collaboration suites.
Yes, and because we'll know what kind of collaboration, because you know better than most that collaboration without a purpose is not showing adoption results. By this model, you will understand what is the right mode of collaboration and engagement required to succeed. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
So what's the key point at SAP? Because we're way before time.
Well, I think, I mean, to me, that what's most exciting is that we have, we've broken our business up into platforms, applications, and business networks. Those three pieces are going to be central to any kind of transformation. You are going to want the best business applications in the cloud, on-premise, wherever. You are going to want to extend those to make them competitive, drive competitive advantage, which is where a platform comes in. And the third is whether it's supplier networks or partner networks, employee contingent networks, or social collaboration with Jam, we own some of the, as collectively the largest network model in the business. So we have the network for you to participate in and take some of this latency out of your business.
Great. Thank you, Samir,
Thank you
for coming.
Nice to see you. Thank you very much.